Hello all and welcome to Stingray Tom's Florida and another dip into the archive. Today I'm looking at the Auto Train, the passenger service that runs from Washington, D.C. to Sanford in Central Florida. As I write this, in early 2022, the Auto Train is in its 50th year of operation. That makes it worthy of a look in the first place, but consider this. Walt Disney World is also celebrating its 50th anniversary. In itself, that's not anything more than a coincidence, but the history of Auto Train has quite a few interesting parallels with the massive tourist development that calls itself the happiest place on earth and the vacation kingdom of the world. So let's explore the connections between these two seemingly unconnected aspects of Florida tourism. Enjoy! By the way, I'll be making two videos about the Auto Train. This one focuses on the history and general operation of the service, and then I'll create a secondary one that will focus on the details of its operation, one that covers the type of rail vehicles, commonly referred to as rolling stock, that Auto Train has used. I hope that video will be of interest to everyone, but it'll contain much more train-related information that's probably more oriented to rail fans. In it, I'll read parts of early magazine articles, as I'm no rail expert and I want to make sure I get it right. Anyway, let's get back on track. Walt Disney World opened on October 1st, 1971. Auto Train conducted its first run to Central Florida on December 6, only 2 months later. Was this a coincidence? Probably not, but the news reports at the time don't talk about a connection. In fact, the three magazines in the archive, which came out only a few months after Auto Train began operations, only mentioned Disney World twice, and just because of its proximity to the end point of the train. It's certainly true that Auto Train's business plan was looking at tourism in the entire state, not just Disney World, but there's no question that they were not only influenced by the new vacation destination, they were influenced by the same information that Disney Company used to pick its new Florida home. This was my aha moment when looking at Auto Train's story. But to explore it, we'll have to travel back several years before 1971. The Disney story is famous. I've even mentioned it in this video. The most romantic aspect is that almost legendary flight in 1963 over the Orlando area, where Walt Disney saw the interchange of Florida's Turnpike and Interstate 4. It suggested that that's the moment when he chose the nearby swampland on which to build his world. Of course, that flight was actually the end point of several years of research, since Walt Disney knew that only 5% of the people who visited Disneyland came from east of the Mississippi. Not surprisingly, Auto Train had a similar origin. This time, the business idea grew out of government research. The U.S. Department of Transportation produced a $3 million study that was authorized by Congress in 1965. That would be $26 million in 2022, though when was the last time Congress spent only $26 million on something? The study looked at the viability of an auto ferry service from the north to Florida, and by 1968 it was determined that there was enough potential profitability in the concept that it would be best left to private enterprise. Up stepped an Assistant Secretary of Transportation named Eugene Garfield, who left the public sphere, put in some $60,000 of his own money, and joined a group of investors to form a new company. While there were many details to address, one of the most important is where the train service would run. Washington, D.C. was an easy choice for the northern terminus in that it wouldn't have to navigate northern tunnels that'd be a height issue, yet New York City was only a 4-hour drive. But what about the southern end of the line? Somewhere in Florida, but where? Miami was not only the largest population, but prior to Disney World it was the brightest spot for tourism. But there was also the snowbird market. Although they were spread throughout the southern half of the state, from Newport Richey south to Naples on the Gulf Coast, and from Daytona Beach to Homestead on the Atlantic. Plus, there were tens of thousands in the center, in Polk and Highland counties, as well. In April 1969, the Auto Train Corporation formed and looked at the same data Walt Disney had seen years before. Looking at this map of the eastern half of the U.S., a funnel shape can be imagined using the interstate system, one that collects every southbound traveler towards Florida. It's simplistic, but by the time people enter Georgia or the Carolinas, the majority end up either on Interstate 75 or 95. Those two highways, with a brief bit of help from the Florida Turnpike and Interstate 4, would bring millions of vacationers to the Orlando area. A southern terminus near there was clearly advantageous, and Sanford was the closest location to the Disney property on a main line without going past it. From the Sanford station, I-4 is only 2 miles or 3 kilometers away, and the Turnpike 30 miles or 48 kilometers. Disney's focus was on the wide mouth of the funnel, collecting potential guests from the Midwest to New England, while AutoTrain wanted to make sure that its customers would have easy access to all of Florida. The Florida Development Commission stated in 1966 over 14 million tourists traveled to Florida by car. A study of some of these travelers indicated that more than a quarter would be willing to pay over $100 for an auto ferry service. Because of that, Eugene Garfield, who I mentioned was an assistant secretary of transportation in President Johnson's administration, formed a new company and became its president. With a law degree from the University of Miami in 1960, Garfield had never worked for a railroad in any capacity. Indeed, several of the other company's officers were new to trains as well. Still, they brought a vision of what would be effectively a new hybrid type of transportation. Until that time, trains mostly ferried cars on their way to be sold, not driven away by their owners. Garfield, who was the face and voice of AutoTrain, was thought to be something of a visionary, a title used for the head of the Walt Disney Company as well. There's little need to dwell on the creativity of Walt Disney, but it must be noted that what would become Walt Disney World, including the concept of Epcot Center, was the final vision he would work on before his death in 1966. On the other hand, the 36-year-old Garfield was at the start of his career. Not to get into it too much, but after he left AutoTrain, he went on to serve as the primary advisor to the governor of Florida and the Florida Department of Transportation on the development of high-speed rail system in Florida, and served as the chair of the North American Maglev Corporation. He also helped start another rail line called the Florida Fun Train. That idea was to create a train to move tourists from beach destinations to Central Florida's theme parks at around $50 a trip. The train cars would be loaded with diversions, including video games, live entertainment, dance floors, tiki bars, and restaurants. But back to AutoTrain. Its development required the purchase of rolling stock, including fully enclosed bi-level car haulers that would protect the valuable cargo on its 850-mile or 1,368-kilometer trips. Those were from Canadian National Railway. At the same time that AutoTrain was launching a new private passenger service, several other rail companies, including Santa Fe and Western Pacific, were ending their service, while Amtrak, the government passenger service, was also getting started. Because of the coincidence, AutoTrain was able to purchase nearly 30 nicer passenger cars of various types, the details of which will be in the supplementary video. Each of the passenger cars were refurbished. Interiors were ripped out and replaced. A young interior designer, Carolyn Settles, was hired to create a completely new look. As Railroading magazine stated, the nightclub cars were given an almost blue decor, including carpeted walls. The buffet cars had purple floors and chairs, yellow walls, and a pink ceiling. There's a cafeteria-style serving counter at one end of each car. The coaches have red and gray interiors and wildly colored red, blue, and yellow fully reclining seats with leg rests. But it's the exterior color scheme that attracts the most attention. White with red and purple stripes that run the length of the train. And believe it or not, purple trucks. Marvelously, even these design choices have a parallel at Walt Disney World. This is the interior of the contemporary resort. See the colors? A very similar palette, one that for Disney was created to represent America's desert Southwest, especially near sunset. That's why it's called the Grand Canyon Concourse. The color palette, The Mary Blair mural, and even the carpet on the walls, was designed to make the vast atrium of the Contemporary feel less like an empty blimp hangar and more like a warm, inviting space for families. Auto Train's bold design choices created some controversy, but overall they were successful and generated some excitement. They also helped Carolyn Settles, who would go on to create her own successful design firm. Then there are the hostesses and their Carolyn Settles design uniforms. Passenger trains have attendants, of course, but Auto Train chose to follow the concept of the airlines and hire young women as train hostesses. The uniforms included multiple pieces which could be worn in different arrangements. There will be further information on them in the next video, as the 3 magazines in the archive were nice enough to mention some of the hostesses by name. Auto Train's first departure on December 6, 1971, allowed 4 passengers in a car from Lorton to Sanford for $190. That'd be about $1,300 in 2021. Because of the low prices of gas, about 36 cents a gallon, the 850-mile drive would only cost about $25, even though the average car at the time got about 12 miles per gallon. Therefore, this wasn't an inexpensive alternative, but it did cover fully reclining seats, a dinner and continental breakfast, and entertainment, including either a piano player or a guitarist in the nightclub. Still, it proved successful from the very beginning. The auto carriers were able to load between 6 to 10 cars each, depending on the length of each car. Railroading magazine noted that Cadillacs were by far the most popular car being transported, a nod to both Americans' love of large cars before the first gas crisis of the 70s, as well as the relative affluence of auto train passengers. The magazine quotes the company's VP of Operations, Melton Clemens, as saying, "You wonder if people just don't go out and buy Cadillacs to carry along." Indeed, a later article reports that in the first few years of operation, fully 60% of cars transported were from General Motors' premium brand. The service was efficient and received high marks from passengers, many of which would become repeat customers. It would run 1 train each way every day of the week, carrying up to 270 passengers each way. This would result in a yearly passenger number over 150,000, and the auto train became quite profitable considering their break-even level was about 50% capacity. In late 1973, an additional train was added, which would leave 4 hours later, operating each way every other day. Likewise, at the same time, Walt Disney World was doing a remarkable business. Millions of people throughout the eastern U.S. were traveling to Florida specifically to visit the Magic Kingdom, the park thought of as Disneyland East, as well as the rest of the unique resort. Considering their early success, it's not surprising that both companies looked at expanding. Auto Train did so in 1974 with a new route originating from Louisville, Kentucky. This would connect with the Midwest along the lines of the left side of the interstate funnel. In fact, it's only about 60 miles west of I-75. Around the same time, Disney began planning for the project that would become Epcot Center. While it was initially an idea presented by Walt Disney, the planning, about a decade after Walt's death, developed from the visionaries' experimental utopian city to an amusement park with the theme of an ongoing World's Fair. Groundbreaking for Disney World's second park was on October 1st, 1979, 8 years to the day of the opening of Walt Disney World. Both the new train route and the new theme park were projected to be successful, but unfortunately they really weren't. The Trains magazine issue in December 1992 explained the auto train expansion this way. The undercapitalized auto train overextended itself by launching a second train between Louisville and Sanford on a much slower schedule. Maintenance lagged. 3 major derailments occurred, although exact causes were unclear. There were not replacement cars available and no capital to think about new equipment. Finally, escalating insurance and labor costs, airline fare deregulation, and alleged mismanagement forced Auto Train into bankruptcy and then out of business by 1981. While those were significant issues, most were tied to the beginning of the early 1980s recession. That recession, the worst since the Great Depression 50 years earlier, was caused by the 1979 energy crisis brought on by the Iranian Revolution. The Louisville route and corporate mismanagement partly caused the downfall of AutoTrain, but it was also the cheaper airfare and a general downturn in tourism. By the way, just like he did for the first AutoTrain departure, Eugene Garfield stood at the platform in Lorton to bid the last train farewell less than 10 years later. Epcot Center took 3 years to build, opening yet again on October 1st, this time 11 years after the opening of Walt Disney World. As wonderful as the new park was, it cost an estimated $800 million to $1.4 billion and opened in the midst of the recession. While the Walt Disney Company was strong enough to weather the recession, it resulted in a significant loss of revenue with some of the lowest attendance levels until the September 11 attacks. Disney World, let alone the Walt Disney Company, didn't go out of business the way that AutoTrain did, but the next part of the story continues the intriguing parallels between the two companies. Of course, going out of business isn't usually the end of a good business idea, but the AutoTrain Corporation was gone for good. But it left a legacy, a ready-made market, as well as an onboard service that was provided with flair. These aspects, as well as the availability of newer rolling stock, meant that Amtrak, the quasi-public corporation that provides intercity rail service in the U.S. and parts of Canada, was able to launch the new AutoTrain as a tri-weekly service on Thanksgiving in 1983. There's a story that says then Amtrak president Graham Claytor called Eugene Garfield on the phone and said, "Gene, your AutoTrain is going to run again, just the way it was." The initial results were promising, and the service went daily the next October. Amtrak, which coincidentally began operations in 1971, had realized that as the country was coming out of the recession, the AutoTrain, properly managed, could be successful. The Walt Disney Company was weakened during the recession, and the individuals who managed it through the 1970s had lost a great deal of power and would eventually lose control. Oddly enough, even though Disney was regularly producing movies, by the time of the recession, the theme parks were generating 70% of Disney's income. This included revenues from Disneyland, Disney World, and Tokyo Disneyland, which had opened in April of 1983. After Walt Disney's death in 1966 and his brother Roy's death in 1971, just a couple months after Disney World opened, they left the company under the control of Don Tatum, Card Walker, and Walt's son-in-law, Ron Miller. Miller would become president of the company in 1980 and CEO in 1983, but he was removed from both offices in 1984 after the Sid Bass family purchased 18.7% of Disney stock. Under Bass's influence, the board brought in Michael Eisner from Paramount to be CEO and Frank Wells from Warner Brothers to be president, two men with huge pedigrees in the entertainment sector. Like most dramatic corporate board shakeups, this was a major change in direction for the Walt Disney Company and Disney World. There's no way to even give a thumbnail sketch of what occurred. There's been dozens of books covering the Eisner years. I know, I've had to read them all. Suffice it to say that both the fresh blood of Amtrak and Eisner's Disney administration brought both AutoTrain and Disney World to a new operational level. In 1995, the appearance of the AutoTrain changed dramatically with new cars known as bi-level superliners. The service received a third generation of locomotives, all of which have been produced by General Electric. There were also new car haulers, including ones that could handle the rise of the boxy and tall SUV. While Cadillacs were the norm decades earlier, the types of vehicles that AutoTrain carries has expanded and diversified, just like the passengers themselves. It continues the one trip each way per day, even into 2022. The trains have increased their capacity, however, and the service carried over 200,000 passengers each year between 2007 and 2019. Amtrak's auto train generates $3.5 million annually, making it the highest revenue of any of Amtrak's long-range routes. Today, Disney World has 4 theme parks, 2 water parks, more than 25 resort hotels, and much more. It continues to be one of the most profitable parts of the Walt Disney Company, especially since it's now being connected with the Disney-owned Pixar, Star Wars, and Marvel universes. There's no question that it will continue to be successful for the foreseeable future. And it appears that during a time when many people fly to Florida and many more people drive to Florida, some people are still going to take the train. I would say that Auto Train, like Disney, isn't going anywhere, but we all know that it does, twice a day. Thank you for watching another of my videos. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel to learn more about Florida's tourism history. Stingray Tom's Florida, traveling through time around the Sunshine State.